Hey, folks, it's Patricia here. I am checking in with you here on this Sunday afternoon, and welcome to the 15-Minute Advocate. This is day 3, I believe, of this series. I believe so. We've talked about advocacy, what it is. We talked about why we advocate, and today we are going to talk about the how of advocacy. And because this is a quick and dirty learning session, we're going to jump right in. Like I said, we've talked about those other couple of things, and now we're going to talk about the how. And if you've already watched session 2, where we talked about the why, I kept trying to give you hints of some other ways in which how we can advocate and be advocates without it being so blatant, perhaps, right? I kept showing my t-shirt, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But when it boils down to, it seems very simplistic, but it kind of boils down to, I think, to two major ways in how we advocate and how we can be advocates. We can do it directly and publicly and very loudly, if that's what you want to say, or we can do it more indirectly, more subtly, with a quieter tone to it. And so that's what we're going to talk about a little bit in depth here, and we're going to jump right in here. So when we're talking about how we advocate more directly and publicly, most of the time we're talking about in the terms of what people think about, right? And it's the stuff that freaks people out, and they're like, oh, I can't do that, I'm not a public speaker or whatever. But we're talking about, let's break it down into sections, into groups, right? You can be an advocate, and you can do it in writing. You can do it in writing. If you're doing it in writing, we're talking about writing speeches, writing presentations. That's not getting to the presentation part of it, because that's the physical. And my notes just went flying out into the yard, and that is so awesome. So we're going to keep talking, but you're going to see some movement behind me, right? And so when we're talking about in writing, those are things, when people write articles or other things that are supportive, and they're very public, right? You're not trying to hide it, because if it's getting published, if it's a presentation that's getting made, whether you're making the presentation or whether it's your name on it and someone else is giving it, it's a very public thing that's being done. And so writing is a very strong, very public way, and making presentations or writing presentations and speeches and things like that is a very public and strong way. When I worked for several different public officials, I was never officially the speechwriter, but I wrote speeches for them because of the strength of my writing and the strength of the delivery, what I could do of assuming their voice on their behalf and making those things happen. And so more than once, I became the unofficial speechwriter for my bosses, because they liked the way I wrote and what I did and how I could deliver the message that they were trying to deliver. And so I was never, giving those speeches. I was writing them and giving them to someone else, and they were being made. Another second way of how we can be advocates, and sorry, got a little window coming up those stairs, and how we do it is when we are doing it verbally, right? And so this is when you're talking about, speaking out. So let's say maybe you are the one that's delivering the speech. You are making the comments. Maybe you're making phone calls, right? And that you're like, that's, freaks you out. And how you can do those things. That's another way of how we can be advocates and how you can deliver a message. And when people get upset about some of those things because they don't know what to do or how to, or what is it you should be saying, and, how far should you go? And those are things that we'll talk about another time. But again, just recognizing that's a how. And then, so we're talking about in writing, we're talking about verbally. And then there's physically. And you're like, what do you mean physically? I mean, like physically doing something. And this is when you're thinking about when folks who are doing marches, right? When they are attending meetings, okay? So your body, your physical presence adds up to being an act of advocacy. I don't know if some of you recognize or remember back last summer when there was the horrible incident of the terrorist activity where the people in the church were killed last year. I believe it was summer of 2016. If not, it was summer 2015. But in response to all of that, there was lots of protests, lots of things. And there was a woman who, there were folks who were complaining about the Confederate flag flying over the state. I think it was still flying in several key positions, including, I think, the state legislature. And there was a woman who was like, I am tired of talking about this. And she went and physically climbed the flagpole and brought that flag down. That was an act, a physical act of advocacy. All right. Now, all of these things have consequences, which you may view good or bad, but those are ways in which we can be advocates and do those things. Okay. So we've talked about the very public, direct ways in which people will advocate, in writing, verbally, and physically. So let's flip that to what's the second half of that, what I said, right? How you can be an advocate and do it more indirectly, perhaps, not as publicly, more subtly, but that does not make it any less effective. And that's where people kind of think that the only people who are effective are the ones that are out there, screaming at a march or talking in front of large crowds, okay? And that's not necessarily the case. So keeping those same three categories, writing, verbal, and physical, here are some ways in which you can be more indirect and still be an advocate. In writing, when you are signing your name to a petition, that is an act of advocacy, okay? When you're writing postcards or sending an email, it's something that's less private, right? No one knows you did except for you and the person who's receiving it, perhaps, unless you announce it otherwise. But those are still ways of being able to show up as an advocate and to let your voice be known, but perhaps not in as direct or, as, quote, loud a way as some of the other manners. Verbally, you're like, well, how can you be less, vocal when you're being, making something verbal? Well, think about this. When you're having private conversations with friends and family, you're not necessarily blasting those conversations to the public. However, and they're not on, speed dial to anyone. However, that is still acts of advocacy. Just like I said, in a more private setting and a more, and a more targeted audience, which can be just as effective. People call that grassroots stuff, right? When you start at the local level, which local always means starting somewhere close to home, and then it builds, and then it becomes a part of this much larger piece of work, social activity, social justice activity, or whatever, okay? Another way is recording. Some people like recordings. Well, like if you respond to something, if they're asking you to say, hey, well, you just put your voice on recording, saying you're in favor of something, or you're opposed to this situation, whatever. They're asking you to go on camera, which can be a little public, but if it's not something that's going out right then, right? Let's say it's going to be part of a documentary, or it's going to be part of something that's a larger piece that's more delayed, and you're expressing your opinions. So that kind of walks the line, but again, it's not something that's immediate and it's in your face right then and there, right? There's a little more time, there's a little more thought that can be given to it, perhaps, and that you again, it's being recorded. So physically, what about physically and being more indirect? Well, remember my little hints from yesterday or from the previous day? Well, wearing t-shirts, we all do it. We're wearing a t-shirt that's saying something about an organization. How many of you remember the shirt that I had on yesterday and what it was? Well, it was about an education initiative that I'm a part of, right? I don't have to say anything about it, but it says Gentex, and CTX, and what it does is it causes people to come up and like, well, what's that about? What is that? And I'm like, oh, this is this awesome college signing day activity that we host in the spring here in Central Texas. And then I get to go tell them about it, right? So the things that you wear can clearly, a t-shirt, a pin, a button, those are things that are more indirect that cause someone to maybe pursue and to ask you about something that then instigates a conversation where you can have exchange words about what it is, the issue that you're concerned about or whatever. Another way, yard signs. Remember those? Everybody uses them for political things, for social issues, whatever. That's a way of, literally putting your stake in the ground and saying, here's what I believe, here's who I support, right? And so that's a very indirect but kind of public way, but more subtle in some ways, unless it's, of course, it's a 5-foot, sign, then it's not quite as subtle, but it's still an indirect way of letting someone know that there's something that you believe in, that you support for whatever reason. And then if they're interested or want to know, they can, again, that instigates a conversation. Bumper stickers. Think about that. How many bumper stickers? Everybody doesn't use them. I'm always been kind of picky about bumper stickers. But bumper stickers are a very clear way of indirectly being an advocate for a belief, an issue, a cause, music, books, whatever it might be. Okay, so those are three ways using the same methods: writing, speaking, or verbally, or physically using using your body, your car, whatever, in order to carry a message. But again, it's the method in which it's done, and that shows how. So here's my point. Why would I just talk about this? It doesn't seem very relevant, right? And we've done it very quickly in our less than 15 minutes. And here's the reason why. No one should feel like I cannot be an advocate, that I can't speak up about something. There's no way that I can be a voice, because I just showed you in less than 15 minutes a dozen ways in which anybody can be an advocate for whatever cause that they want to. You choose what it is by your levels of comfort, by your levels of desired engagement, and your method of training. And so those of us who have greater training might be more comfortable with making a speech about something. Those of us who are not, they may be more comfortable behind the scenes and perhaps being support to an organization, or by, offering your skills. I didn't even get into that. That is another way of being an advocate that is definitely less seen, which is there are tons of people who work behind the scenes to make things happen because that's how they want to give back, right? Remember, being an advocate is about being supportive of a process, supportive of a proposal, supportive of a policy, whatever it is, and showing your support and in varying ways. So there's no reason why anyone should feel like, oh, I can't give back, because you're doing it probably every day. If you have a bumper sticker, if you own a t-shirt that advertises something other than yourself, and even then yourself, you can be an advocate, and there are so many ways that you can do that. So again, sticking to our less than 15 minutes, there we are. That's the quick and dirty of the how of advocacy, and how you can show up directly or indirectly in writing, verbally by speaking out, or physically by physically being somewhere, physically using, the resources around you to support and carry a message. And so for the next time, we are going to prepare. We've talked about what advocacy is. We've talked about the why. Why do people get engaged and want to be advocates? And today we've talked about the how of it. And tomorrow, the next time, we're going to talk about the when. We're going to talk about the when of being an advocate, because there are so many times when timing is crucial. You could have an awesome message. You could have fantastic things to say, but if you deliver it at the wrong time, you have just nailed, it's just dead in the water. Okay? And we'll talk about that the next time. So thank you for joining me yet again on the 15-Minute Advocate. We'll be working on the when next time. If you want to know more about advocacy and about upcoming opportunities to engage in the Advocacy Academy and or additional trainings, if you have questions, hit me up on Facebook at PVH Consulting Group, or you can, search my name and message me, Patricia V as in Vicky, but it's not Vicky, Patricia V. Hayes, or you can just go to patriciavhayes.com and leave me a message. All right. Thanks, you guys, and I will talk to you later. Bye.